So far, we've been talking about decision statements. And in the context of decision statements, one of the sort of pitfalls that you find yourself in is when you get into a long chain of else if statements, you get to a point whereby it becomes too repetitive, right? Because you're comparing one variable against many constants, and you just sort of have to do a lot of these repetitions that you can see here. Now, to help us handle that, there is another way of handling decision statements, which is what is called a switch statement. So I've created a file here called switch-case.js. Here's we're going to write that. And the switch statement provides you with a multi-way of branching all these sort of decisions and comparisons that you're trying to make, and you sort of now do that based on a single expression, right? So you don't go and find yourself in this case whereby you have to repeat all these expressions all the time. So using a single expression, you can be able to now branch every other decision that you want to make out of that, and it is more clear than just using this if else if long chain that you're using here when we are comparing one variable against many constants, which is the case at the moment. Now, I'm going to start by showing you the simple syntax of a switch statement. And what you use the switch keyword, so just say switch, and then you give it an expression. So in here, you're going to give it an expression. And after this, you have a set of curly braces. Inside of these curly braces is where you now do the the sort of comparisons, but you don't do the comparisons using multiple expressions as we see in the if else if scenario. In this case, you just type in case is the keyword that you use, then you type in the value that you're comparing with that expression. So if you have, let's say you have value 1, you do it like that, then you're going to give it an output here, right? So you have some sort of output in that case. Then you can sort of break out of this case once you find what you want. But if there are multiple cases that you want to compare, then you can also have a second case that is going to compare a second value. And in this case, you also do your comparison. Then remember, in the if else case, we had the else statement, which was the default, which is what our program defaults to whenever none of the conditions have been met. So in the switch case here, we use default. So you just type in default, and here you give a default statement that is going to be output in case the all the sort of conditions that you have before that have not been met. So this is what the switch case syntax looks like. Let me just type here syntax so that you can understand this whenever you see the code. Now that we've seen this, I'd like us to go ahead and start doing just some simple switch cases. And as we look at that, I'm going to explain to you the evaluation and the matching flow of a switch case statement. So, like you've mentioned, in a switch case, you just give your expression once. You don't do multiple expressions like in the case of an else if scenario. So you only have your expression once. And to do that, I'd like us to first of all declare a simple variable. And I'm going to declare a simple variable that says, let's say, called level, and it's going to have a statement 1. So assuming you're maybe playing a game or you're going somewhere, and then at each level there's some sort of warning that comes, or some action that gets triggered. So I'd like us to start with the first aspect of this, which is evaluating the expression. So how you evaluate the expression, you just type in switch. Then instead of the set of parentheses, of course, you write your expression. Now the good thing about this is you can just type in this case, label, like that. That is going to be enough for you as an expression. Then after this, you have your curly braces. Then you can do now the comparisons. So you just type in case. Then you're going to say in case, then you give a statement. So if it is info, so what this means here is that it's the same as saying if info is equivalent to 1, right? But now you don't sort of write that expression outright and with all the many sort of things that you have to type in. Then here you can just console.log a statement, and this statement is going to say something like, let's say, info message. something of the sort. Then here, in case, now as you can see, info of course is not the same as one, right? So that means this statement that we write here is going to be skipped, right? Then we move to the next one. So the same way we've been doing in the else if, whenever the previous condition is not met, you just move to the next condition if that condition is available. So let's say the second case just says one, right? In this case, this is equivalent to the one that we have before there. So in this case, you can just say, type in a statement that says something like warning, like that. Now, in this case, this is not going to skip because there's a match in this case. I'm just going to write a comment here and just tell you that, let's say this is the first match that has happened. It's the first match runs like that. So these expressions simply work like this. You can also just add another case. Just let's add maybe one more case here. So you can add another case. Then you say if it was error. Now you're trying to compare the statement error with the rest. Then you just do console.log. Then you have a statement here, and the statement is going to be error. Should be a capital E, error, like that. Once you've done this, now the good thing about the switch case, like I've mentioned, you can be able to break out of these conditions, right? It's not the same as the if else if, where you sort of have to just go fall through and look at everything else, or rather all the other conditions until you get to a default. You can break out of these cases at any point that you want, and to do that we use a break statement. So you just type in break. Just type in break like that, and then you're done. It's going to break out of this case for you. Then let's set up a default before we run our code. You can have a default condition, and then in this default condition, you just console.log a statement, and this statement can say something like an unknown level. Should be a U. An unknown level. So this unknown level, of course, is when, again, the assumption is you're probably playing some sort of a game. But let us run our code so that it can make more sense instead of just me mentioning things here. So we're going to say node, I call this file switchcase.js. Then you hit enter. You'll notice a few things here. Remember, we were looking at the statement one, right? So what it did is it went ahead, the first case, compared on the first case, that's is info equivalent to one. Then of course it's not equivalent, so it skips this sort of line here. So let me just write a comment here to say that it skips this first case. But when it gets to the second case, it sees the statement one, right? And one is equivalent to this one. So of course we expect it to console.log this statement. But something interesting happens here, right? You notice that it also prints the statement error, which is what happens on this case. But we know for sure that error is not equivalent to one. So why is it still printing out error? And then of course it broke out of this entire sort of scenario because of the break statement that we have here. So why is this case, or why did it happen like this? The reason why it is happening like this is a certain phenomenon in a switch case that we usually call fall through, right? I'm going to have, let me just write a statement as a comment here. There's a phenomenon in when you're using the switch case that is known as fall through or false through. Let me just call it type it in there. So it's known as fall through, and fall through is when the previous condition is met, but because we don't have any sort of guide rails in place, then it defaults, or rather it falls through the rest of the cases that come before it, or rather after it. They fall through and they also execute. And the reason they do this is because we don't have a break statement at any of these cases here. So the break statement is the one that stops this fall through behavior, right? Just to show you that, I'm going to add a break statement here, and okay, let's have break like that. Then we're going to run this code one more time. When we run it, now you'll notice that it only prints out warning and it doesn't fall through. So that gets rid of this fall through behavior that these switch cases usually have. The main thing that you need to understand about the fall through behavior is that sometimes it can be intentional. In our case here, this was not intentional because we don't, again, obviously error is not equivalent to one, but sometimes you can have an intentional fall through in case you want to let sort of multiple sort of conditions that share the same logic to be executed. Right. So, but in this case, yeah, this of course does not share any of that, right? So what I'm going to do, I'll just get rid of this break like this, just to, I'll maintain this code as it is so that you can understand the fall through behavior on this. Now, this is a case where, like I've mentioned, it's not an intentional fall through. But what if you have the fall through behavior is intentional? You intended for it to happen the way it did. So to do that, I'm going to just I'll just type here fall through just to separate the logic. So fall through behavior. And in this fall through behavior, I'm going to just type in switch as well here. And I'm going to first of all just declare a simple statement, and I'll call this statement day. And let's say I'm going to have day as some other statement. So let's say a day like Monday, right? Monday, or let's say Sunday. Let's say a day is Sunday. They should be able to guide us through. Then we're going to have I just want to compare certain days. If it is a weekend, it tells us it's a weekend. If it is a weekday, it tells us that it's a weekday. So I'm going to just switch here, and then I'm going to pass in day, of course, as the expression. And then you have a set of curly braces just as before. And in here, we're going to write our cases, right? So in the first case, I'd like us to compare, let's say Saturday, right? So we're going to have Saturday, and you can just type in here, let's say Saturday. Now, what we know about Saturday is that Saturday is still a weekend, right? So Saturday is still a weekend, and Sunday is also a weekend, right? So just keep that in mind because I want to set up an intentional fall through behavior here. Then we have another case, and this case is now going to be Sunday because we know Saturday and Sunday are both weekends. Now, what we normally do is I'll just do console.log and then write a statement here that says, let's say weekend. Then this same statement is what I'm going to just type in here because again, both Saturday and Sunday are weekends. I'll just add the semicolons here. Both Saturday and Sunday are weekends. And once we get this two, then we can just sort of set up a default. Then the default is going to console.log a statement that says any other day that is not Saturday or Sunday is going to be a weekday, like that. Should be a string here. Any other day other than that is going to be a weekday. So this is what you'd normally do. And just to run our code here, you see, this is what it prints. It prints weekend and then it also prints weekday at the same time, which of course, as we know, this is not supposed to be the case. This is a fall through behavior. But from what you can see right now, the fall through behavior is unintentional because now that we've already compared Sunday, we need a break statement here just to avoid that fall through behavior. So we add a break statement, right? Then if we clear this and run it again, you see we get now only weekend because as we know, Sunday is a weekend, right? Same thing if we change this to Saturday is going to be, let's have something like Monday. Monday. And for Monday, if we run this as well, you see we get Monday is a weekday. So it goes ahead and prints out the default because Monday is neither equivalent to Saturday nor equivalent to Sunday as well. But now I'm going to just switch this to, let's say, Sunday still. But we know that if the user input is either Saturday or Sunday, they should be printing out weekend. And as you can see, the output is still the same for both cases, right? So this is where we bring out the entire concept of intentional fall through behavior, where because Saturday and Sunday, they share the same logic, right? So it makes no sense for us to do these kinds of repetition. So how we do that, you can just get rid of this first console because they share the same. Then you can now have case this, case this. Now, what this means is that you are intentionally allowing the program to fall through any of these cases, right? So if you change this to, let's just take it to Saturday. If you change this to Saturday, Saturday should be like that. If you change that to Saturday, it's going to compare this case, and then it's like, oh yeah, it's Saturday. Of course, Saturday is a weekend. But as we know from the the fall through behavior, it's going to, because there's no break statement there, it will fall through and also allow the next statement or the next logic to be executed as well. So that way we're doing it intentionally, and it's going to print out weekend. And let's clear this and run again. You see now we get weekend for both Saturday and for Sunday as well there. So that is intentional. Now, when you talk of an intentional fall through behavior, an intentional fall through behavior usually occurs when you don't have a break statement. We just saw this where when you get rid of the break statement, it goes ahead and even executes the default aspect of this. But whenever that is the case, that is usually a bug. And I'm going to just write this as a comment. I'll just write here that an intentional fall through behavior. An intentional fall through behavior is a bug. I'll just say maybe it's a common bug. And if it is a bug, of course, that bug has to be fixed. So whenever you're using the switch case, always ask yourself a question like, should this execution continue to the next block or not? If it should continue to the next block, then that becomes intentional fall through behavior. But if it should not continue, then that is an intentional fall through behavior, and you have to take care of it by just using a simple print statement. Let's now switch ahead and talk about this default statement, the default clause that we've seen here. The default clause is the one that serves as basically the else clause that we saw here when you're looking at the if else if aspect. The default clause is usually not required whenever you're using this switch case. It's not required, but it is highly recommended for you to have it so that you can handle any unexpected values, right? So in case you find some code that doesn't have the default, but it has all this, it's okay. Like there's nothing wrong with that, but it is highly recommended that you have a default clause so that in case there's any unintended behaviors or unexpected values, they're going to sort of default directly to this. And the thing about the default clause is that it can always appear anywhere, but as a convention and a good practice, we usually have it at the end, right here. So you just basically put it last in the switch case aspect here. So I believe that is sort of clear, and I do hope that you're taking notes as well on this, because now I'd like us to go ahead and write one last program, I think, and then so that we can see what actually I will probably just write about two more programs, but I'd like us to just demonstrate the fall through behavior in a way as well, just using some multiple cases here as well. So I'm going to just write here something like multiple cases as a comment, and we're going to start with a simple statement. So let's say we're going to have, I'm going to declare a variable and I'll just call it fruit. And this fruit could be any fruit really. So let's say the fruit is an orange, right? Just as a base to get us started. Then we're going to have a switch, and we have fruit, of course, for the expression part, curly braces, and then we can have our cases. So here you can have multiple of these cases, of course. So let's say if it is an apple, then we're going to have, I want us to have multiple cases. If it is a pear, then you can have another one case like, let's say it's a maybe the fruit is a grape. If this is any of those any of that, then this is a berry fruit, right? So this console.log statement like you can just say it is say, let's say, yeah, let's just say it is actually let's say it's a palm or a berry fruit, yeah, something like that. Yeah, so we have it like that, right? So yeah, actually this sort of unrelated kind of, but an avocado is usually a berry. Yeah, I think an avocado is a berry, so you can also just have that there. Then you can have another case, or actually, just to avoid fall through behavior, we need to have a break statement here. Then of course you don't want a case whereby you have different sort of types of fruits being being labeled in the wrong manner. So you have another case here. Let's say we have a case where we're dealing with citrus fruits here. Something like an orange. An orange is definitely a citrus fruit. Okay, I need to, okay, like that. Then you have another case. Let's say a lemon as well. A lemon is also a citrus fruit. So in this case, we just have a console.log and we write a statement that says, let's say it's a citrus fruit, like that. So once you have this, we also need to break, because again we have no intention of allowing fall through behavior at this point, and you can now have a default that is all this is going to default to, and the default is going to this console.log a statement that says whatever other fruit that you're going to give us that is not part of what you've mentioned in these cases is just another a different type of fruit. So you just say other fruit, like that. Should be an R, like that. So this is what it looks like whenever you're dealing with several values that have the same behavior. So what you do is you just stack them together without having without body. So you just, if they share a body like this one here, you just stack all of those cases together, which is the beauty of using the switch case. So in a case, any point where you find yourself, if you're going to use an if else if, and you realize that there's a lot of this sort of repetitions that are happening, you have multiple cases, multiple values that share the same body, then using a switch case just becomes the best option for you there. Now that we understand this and how it can, okay, let's actually just run our program first, just to be sure. So we run this, okay, JS. Then you can see it says it's a citrus fruit because here I have orange. Then if I change this to apple and we run this again, you see it says it's a pomme or a berry fruit, which is good. Now, one thing to always note here is that right now I'm just using I'm using a hard coding the values that we are passing here to this variable. But note that when it comes to an actual program, a real life program that you're writing, you'll be getting this input from a user. So a user will be manually typing in the input, then you compare it with everything else. So it's not going to be a default in this case. I'm using default for demonstration purposes. But once you get to, because again, you're going to be getting the input from a user, for example, in our website, there's a way that you can get that input from the user. But for now, let's just work with this. The other thing that I think we should look at when it comes to switch case, which is probably a common thing that a lot of people also do try out in certain cases, which is not pretty common, but it still gets applied, is dynamic matching, right? So when talk of dynamic matching, it's simply the same thing that you do here with the if else if. We basically pass in all these defaults, as you can see here. A statement has to be true in any case, of course, even here. But let me just show you how that operates here. So I'll just call this dynamic matching. So in dynamic matching, this is whereby you have a case. So I'm going to just we're going to go with the grade analyzer, grade analyzer program. You have a score, of course, the score of a student, and this score is going to be a value, let's say like 80 or 90 is the score of the student. Then what you do is you're going to have a switch. Then you just pass in a true statement here. So in this case, you don't do the normal expression that we saw whereby you have to do all the other comparisons. So you just have a pass in true in your expression part of the switch case. Then when it comes to the cases here, you don't do the default sort of switch case behavior. What you do is you start to manually do your comparison. So you can just say for score greater than or equivalent to, let's say, 90, then you just print a statement here, just console.log a statement that says this person has an A, right? Then in that case, you just you also break, of course, out of this just for the whole fall through behavior thing. Then you add another case. Let's say in this case, if the score is greater than or equal to maybe 80, then you console.log another statement, then you print a B. And just because I don't want to type a lot of things here, I'm just going to break out of this, of course. Then I'm going to go ahead and just set up the default behavior. Then in default, I'll just console.log a statement that says, I'll say something like C and below, like that. So what I'm showing you here is the whole aspect of dynamic matching, whereby you trick, let's say, the range, or you just have predictable base cases, as you've seen here. You just have them predictable. So here, each case that we have is a Boolean expression. And the first one that we see, basically it just evaluates whenever this true runs here. So in this case, everything has to be true. The switch has to be true. The expression that is has to be true for everything else to just proceed to work here. Again, this is not a common thing that we usually do in switch case, but some people also just do apply it. So just to run this, you see we get 90. 90 is an A. And of course, because you have a break, it doesn't default or rather fall through to the rest there. But this is just the simple aspect of dynamic matching whenever you use a switch true. Now that we've been seeing all of this, there's one really, really key thing that I'd like everyone to just note down. And again, I hope that you are still taking notes at this point. When we've seen the switch case, and what we've been seeing is just the simple comparison, right? Like I said, you're just basically comparing if this case here is equivalent to, let's say, the value that you get, that you're comparing it against from before. That is all that is happening there. But one thing to note is that whenever you're doing comparisons, we've seen whenever you do comparison, we can use a double equal sign or triple equal sign. And the difference between the two is that the triple equal sign is strict equality, and this is just equality but not strict. So it doesn't look at, for example, the data type, just looks at the size of the value. Now, the good thing about switch case is, or rather, one of the shortcomings that we saw whenever you're using this double equal sign is that it can typecasting can happen in this case, right? So, for example, you saw when you have one which is a number and one a string, it will think of it as as equivalent. So there's the whole risk of typecasting whenever you're using double equal sign, which we said to help get rid of that, it is recommended that you use triple equal sign in cases whereby that is typecasting is a possibility. Now, what the switch case does is that the switch case default by default, I'll just write here. I'll just write basically the switch case. The switch case. Ooh, okay. The switch case uses, or just switch in general, switch uses the triple equal sign, which ensures strict equality. So it uses this triple equal sign to compare the original expression against each case label. So for example, as you can see, this here is the original expression, then it compares it against each of these. It uses the triple equal sign. There's of course no type coercion in this case because it is strict equality that is being used here. That is one thing that you have. I just need you to note. So if you're writing a program whereby there's a risk of typecasting happening, then you should probably just use a switch case as well. Now, there are a number of common sort of pitfalls and best practice that you have to note whenever you're working with the switch case. Yeah, we've already mentioned them, but I'm just going to mention them one more time. I'll just have as a comment here. The common pitfalls is, okay, should be a T here. The common pitfalls on this is that the first thing is when you're using the break statement, right? So if you miss a break statement, that is going to cause a bug. So missing break, let's say, causes bugs, and you've seen that unless you're doing it intentionally and you want the fall through behavior to occur. But if you miss that, then that becomes an issue. The other thing, apart from the missing that, is whenever you're using the switch case, it if your block, the switch block and everything that you're writing, if a block gets too big, then just as we mentioned with the if else statements as well, whenever that happens, then you have to refactor your code and find a way to use functions. You use functions to basically encapsulate the logic and have some sort of helper function. Now, we haven't looked at helper functions or functions in general, but we're going to see that. So in case of complex logic, you have to you can there's a way that you can be able to handle that with functions. The other thing is, if you're using the if you whenever you're using these case expressions that we've just seen here, they sort of they stick to some literals or some numbers, and in that case it doesn't sort of compute heavy expressions, right? So if you have heavy expressions in line here with this like these switch cases here, it doesn't end up executing them. So you sort of have to just stick to the basic literals and and sort of numbers and enumerations in this case here. I do hope that makes sense. If it doesn't, it's going to make sense as we move forward. The other thing I think I need to mention here is on the nesting that we've seen here. So with if else, we saw the nesting behavior with the if else statements here. You can also try to do the nesting with you can do the nesting with switch case, but again, it's not recommended. But it is just an aspect that in case rather your code gets a bit more complex that you have to use it, then you can use it. But again, like I've mentioned, whenever it gets to complexity or rather a program becomes too complex, instead of doing all these nestings that you can see here, it is advisable to just refactor your code and start using functions in that case. Now, what are some of the real world applications of these switch cases? Because we've just mentioned a number of things here. Just as because they're all decision statements, just the same as if statements here. We use them whenever you're trying to sort of provide permissions to people, let's say logging into a system, right? So you have to provide users with the right permissions. If it is an admin, they get admin access. If it is a normal user, they get a normal user access. If it is an anonymous user, they get an anonymous user access. So that is the same case that we use here. If you're trying to, let's say, you're trying to sort of, if it is transactions, maybe transactions in like finance transactions as well, there are always all those logic and decisions that have to be made. Then the same case, switch case, can be used in that. So it can be used in any aspect where we're using the if else statement, as long as there's a decision that needs to be made and there's a consideration that you have to make on certain basic sort of conditions or operations that have to be carried out. So that is basically it when it comes to the switch statements in JavaScript. I do hope that everything has been clear. In case you do have a question, just let me know in the comments there. But we're going to meet in the next one. So happy coding.